Deprivation. The word comes up all the time. If you're a wellness professional, especially if you ever engage people in a conversation about food, the word you can't open your eyes without seeing the word deprivation. So let's talk about that for a second. There are 3 different types of eaters, and these 3 different types of eaters need completely different solutions if they're having a problem with eating. So let's understand first and foremost that just because we are overweight doesn't mean that that needs to change. If someone is overweight and they are happy and they are healthy and they are peaceful and quiet and feel good about it, it is none of our business, and let's just back off. But if someone is obese and is uncomfortable and is unhappy and the brain is not quiet and there's an unhealthy relationship there that needs mending, then how is that solved? So there are 3 eaters, and therefore 3 solutions. The first is the normal eaters. Now, there is no such thing as normal. Let's call them the blessed. These are the people who, and you've probably heard tell of one of them, is probably your great uncle, because for some reason it's usually the great uncle. It's this person who is overweight, has an unhealthy relationship with food, goes to the doctor, gets a nourishing and portion-controlled meal plan that they then adopt, so then they lose weight, and then they keep it off. Whether or not that happens is just, it's an informational problem. They were eating because it was in front of them, and then someone told them to stop doing that, and so they changed how they ate, they lost the weight, and they kept it off. Done. So those are the blessed. Those are the normal eaters. And those are the people for whom diets are an effective tool. So beyond diet, have you guys heard about this thing? I wrote a blog post about it. It's like the 5 things to eliminate, and then you'll magically lose weight and you'll keep it off forever and everything will be great and there'll be unicorns and stardust and all kinds of stuff. Yes, for like 0.5% of people, and those are the blessed, the normal eaters, for whom it's just an information problem. So that's not me, right? And that's probably not you. And then the next step up is emotional eaters. And emotional eaters are people who have, for whatever reason, at whatever point in their development, started to use food and eating as a coping strategy for emotions, positive or negative, or none. There are some people who use food as a coping mechanism for boredom, which would be neutrality, which would be nothing. So these people often have trauma history and often have co-occurring conditions like anxiety, depression. So these people, the emotional eaters, go to therapy, figure out alternative coping strategies for stress or boredom or happiness or whatever, alternatives to food and eating, and that's what they do when they get sad or stressed or bored or whatever. They address old trauma and they resolve it, they work it out in therapy, and then they adopt the same sort of nutritional program that a blessed eater would adopt, so a nourishing and portion-controlled diet, and they lose the weight and they keep it off forever, right? So most of us have labored for many, many years under the assumption that that's what we are. But the truth of the matter is, for me, and perhaps for you, I tried that. Boy howdy, how many different ways, how many different professionals, how many different therapists, how many years, how many resources, how much craziness, how many coping mechanisms, how many exercises in whatever, and this is how I'm going to do it differently, and this, that, and the other. And then trying in that therapized, shrunken state to adopt one of those nourishing, portion-controlled eating programs, and it just failed and failed and failed and failed. And what made it fail was that these programs so often involved controlled portions of foods that actually trigger an addictive response in me. Which brings us to the third group, which would be food addicts. We're a different kind of blessed because there's incredible clarity around how that problem is solved. With the emotional eaters, How much therapy is enough? When do you feel like you've resolved all trauma? There's too many variables. There's too much gray area. When we've crossed the line into addiction, it's clear that there are certain things that are triggering, and those things are to be avoided. And once we avoid them, we experience tremendous freedom. So if you are like me, and you have crossed the line into an addictive pattern with certain things, freedom from a sense of deprivation, from a sense of loss, from all kinds of negative things that keep us going back, is abstinence, period. And if you still feel drawn, especially physically, to those foods, probably you are not abstinent. And probably the food that you are trying to abstain from is getting in through some sort of, crack, chink in the fence, something. And it might be worth your while to talk to a doctor or a nutritionist or a registered dietitian about how that might be happening so that you can be fully abstinent from the thing that is making you crazy and creating these cravings. For those of you who are emotional eaters, if you have not crossed that line, right, if actually having a little sits on your mind just fine, none of us is made of money, and I'm not telling you to just throw money at the problem. If you have the resources, I strongly recommend that you do some intense work, because the longer you wait, the more deeply embedded you are in the habits that you want to break out of.